folks can learn from this, who didn't have the opportunity to join this evening, and invite our panelists to turn on their cameras and introduce themselves. Thank you both so much for being here with me tonight. Lauren, I'm going to pass it over to you. Can you share a little bit about yourself, how you came to this work, and what you're excited to talk about tonight?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me, Autumn. My name is Lauren Drago, and I'm the Associate Planning Director for the City of Lynn. We are a city of about 100,000 people that is very diverse. We have a lot of foreign-born population, a lot of Spanish speakers, and we're located north of Boston, right on the coast. And I came to this work from a community organizing background back in my college days, and really excited about the prospect of helping communities sort of realize what they want in the cities that they live in. So my work is really dependent on what the community tells me they'd like to see in the future.
Should I go next?
Yes, please, Alicia. Thank you.
Good evening. Alicia Leite here. Thank you so much for having me. Definitely one of my favorite topics. And so right now I'm the supervising planner for the customer experience unit at the Connecticut DOT. And really what our job is to make sure that we understand what customers want and need from their public transportation system. So really understanding that experience and on a level of, when they decide to take transit to when they get to their final destination, how as we as transit planners can improve that. It's vital for us to understand our customers and everything that's happening out in the transit system. So definitely going to talk a lot about, what we've been doing, and very excited to be here. So thank you very much. And we'll get into it. I mean, it's a great topic and I love it. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm also really looking forward to having you here. Some incredible experience coming from both of you, and also in slightly different directions. So that'll be fun to kind of bounce off of. So kicking off our chat, I would love to hear your answers to the same question that everybody else talked about. Alicia, why is public participation so important?
Oh, I love this question, and I love everyone's answers. I was reading through them, and I'm like, yes to all these. and really for me, it just creates the best possible outcome. So whatever you're doing, whether you're planning a transit service, whether you're creating a product, it doesn't matter. Understanding what the people want to see, what they're experiencing is going to give you the best possible outcome. And not only that, but it's going to make you better. In whatever you're doing, you're going to be way more knowledgeable about the work that you're doing, and it's going to connect way more for you. Especially and I'll talk a little bit about this more, but what I'm really excited about is all the pop-up events that we did as part of our action plan. And I think it was great. It definitely was great to talk to the customers and go to the customers where they are. It was also great for us as a team to be out there and learning from our customers. So I think not only, can we create the best, hopefully possible transit system, but we're also going to be better for it. So I think overall it creates better outcomes for everyone.
Awesome answer. I think that's holistic. It's not just about those outcomes. It's about the process along the way, and the outcomes will be better.
Right.
So cool. Thank you. Lauren, what have you got to add?
Yeah, I think all of what everyone said in the chat is really strong. And I really liked what Alicia said too about how it makes your work better as a practitioner. It's so easy to get stuck looking at, Google Earth or being behind the data, sort of turning through things. But if you don't have that face-to-face connection, it can be really easy to kind of forget what the whole point is and what you're working towards. The other thing I think speaks to the importance of public participation is also just that it can be done poorly. And if it's done poorly, you're really just creating more harm. And so it's important not only for these really big picture philosophical values that we seem to all share here tonight, but also in that there's real risk in doing it poorly or not doing it well enough. And to me, that makes these kinds of conversations all the more important to make sure that we're being thoughtful and intentional about how we're pursuing public engagement for our work.
Yeah, and I love that. And I just wanted to just piggyback off what Lauren said is that's absolutely right. And I think there has to be sincerity and a true belief that what you're doing is going to create something better. And you're not just doing it to do it, right? So there's got to be that intentionality and really that sincerity and commitment. You're going to do it and you're going to do it right. So definitely appreciate that. Sorry.
No, I was going to say very similar thing. Though I am curious to hear, I'm kind of going out of order, but would love to, considering some of the folks here have already mentioned that trust piece. Lauren, you just touched on that and about how doing it wrong can actually really degrade that trust. Can you talk a little bit more about that and maybe just give an example?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, part of the issue is that, at least in our community, sometimes we're going to a community that already does not have a lot of trust in their local government. And I try to remember, even when people are being challenging, that they're probably coming from a place of previous trauma, whether it's my government or some other entity or whatever. And trying to just give them the benefit of the doubt and the space to kind of feel the feelings. But yeah, it's really challenging because at the end of the day, we're sort of the humans trying to do things, but we're part of these bigger institutions that in many cases have caused a lot of challenges and solved a lot of problems too, but have really caused harm. And I think it speaks to the fact that community engagement has to be relationship building. It has to be a process over time that ideally, you're always going to have a situation where people are voting or checking a box in a survey that comes with the territory. But if you're really doing it right, this is about more long-term relationship building, power building in the community, so that you're building that trust through these relationships. And that can be really exhausting as a practitioner, honestly. But I think that helps us be in that category of public participation for good, rather than sometimes where it can be sort of misconstrued or manipulated in ways that are not as beneficial for the community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah, I could talk a little to that too. And I just wrote down power building in the community. I love that, Lauren. So thank you. I love that. Yeah, definitely, we work for a large agency. And so I think what has helped me a little bit is that I just try to have real talk with people. Like, I understand that you probably think what we're doing with the action plan is going to be a study that goes on a shelf. And, you're giving us sort of feedback that you've given a million times over. And I think what my job and my team's job to do is to make sure that we do take action, like that we are able to point to something and say, we heard you. And I know that I can't do everything that, we can't fix everything right away, but we're talking to you in plain language. We're talking real talk and we're saying, you know what, we hear you and we were able to do this. And that maybe some things may not happen right away, but being able to just help people and say that we heard you and being able to show some progress and action, and transparency in that, I think helps. And so one of the things we were able to do was we heard from a lot of customers that they didn't like cloth seats on the buses. They tend to get, a little more dirty. They're hard to clean. So we did something right away about that. And right away, meaning we went back out, we did bus seat labs where we had people test different seats and they chose a vinyl seat that's easier to clean. And so all of our new buses now will have those vinyl seats. And so that's just sort of a way that we can say, we heard you, and now we're gonna make that happen. And it may not be on your buses right now, but because you gave us feedback, we did something about it.
Yeah, that's really empowering. Lauren, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the closing the feedback loop is probably one of the hardest parts of community engagement, because the more people you're reaching, the more your expectations are probably raised. And I feel like some of the challenges with that is sometimes you hear things from the community that are not necessarily your agency or within your purview to even solve. And I think that emphasizes that trust component, where even if I'm like, hey, yeah, it's, for us, a lot of our regional transit agency, it can be really challenging for what our residents are experiencing right now. And having that trust to be like, yeah, I'm frustrated by this too. And we're doing everything we can. And like, hopefully in a few years, we'll be able to see progress on that. But that's a hard thing to come to the community with. But yeah, those feedback loops are so important. And part of that goes back to storytelling, which I think sometimes governments are not so proactive about, but you need to be telling the story when you do achieve, like, I think the vinyl seats, like, that's such a great story, and to be able to tie that into previous engagement efforts and really show people, even who didn't participate, that this was the result of an engagement process, that's so valuable for building that trust over the long term, that like, we're doing this for a reason, we're not trying to waste anybody's time. So yeah, I think that's a huge element of the trust factor for sure.
And it was a lot of fun.
Yes.
Yeah, I love that. On that kind of point, what do you two see as being the current state of public participation, right? Obviously, you two are leading that, have spent a lot of time and effort and energy and getting that more right. Curious to hear where you see the state a little bit more broadly of public participation overall. Toss it over to Alicia.
Sure. I mean, I think I'm feeling encouraged. I think the pandemic, maybe with the in-person set us back. I think though it sort of helped us to start thinking of more creative ways to engage. And then also now that we can do stuff in person, we can start doing a variety of things, right? And so I really feel, is my microphone okay? Okay. I do feel like public participation, I'm just seeing this enthusiasm for it. And it's been really great. And I think at my agency, definitely there's been a lot of emphasis on that. So I'm really hopeful about public engagement. And I think people are really starting to see the value and understand that it just makes everything better. Now, is it the easier thing to do? No, it can be, more resources have to be added to something you're doing, or it's more time commitment. Like I said, with the 36 pop-ups, we were all over the state. So that was a lot of time commitment. Was it worth it? Yes. And so I think the current state, I'm hoping, is getting better. And we're now starting to think of, how can we do a multi-pronged approach? Because not every way is going to fit for everyone. I hope we're moving away from the very boring style of like hearings and things like that, where they're just super like one way, like here's a bunch of information, you open it up for comments and then you walk away. I hope we're away from that a little bit.
Oh man, if I never have to do a public hearing ever again, I would be a happy person. Yeah, I agree with you, Alicia. I do think that it's becoming, it feels like less of a niche thing. It feels like there's a broader group of stakeholders that are bought into the idea that public participation is really important. I'm also seeing it from the planning side. I work on a lot of different things. A lot of grant programs require you to be talking about how you're going to engage the public. And I think that's great. Just to be spicy, some of the negative aspects I'm seeing right now are that I think we're running a risk of sort of checking the box still. Like I think, especially, like I said, those grants that I'm applying for, these projects, they sort of have this like, well, did you have a public meeting about it? And that could be very limiting if I have to have a public meeting and there's not really much there. And, just to check the box, I think that's a definite risk. And then to be honest, I think the sort of downside about public engagement can be that it can politicize things that like ideally would not be so politicized. So an example for my world would be like a housing development, right? Like if new development is happening in your community, the community should have a say in what that looks like and have an opportunity to air their grievances and try to pursue the best possible development. But on the other hand, you're dealing with a lot of big systemic issues there, right? Of people who own their homes who are going to be very protective because that's their one, wealth generating asset that they have. And you're going to see classism, you're going to see racism. Those kinds of things are going to come to bear in that kind of setting. And the end result might be that an important housing project doesn't happen at all, or that the units are more expensive because the developer has to spend more time at the upfront sort of dealing with these feedbacks. So it's something to keep in mind, because I think that gets into the ethics of it. Like sometimes you do have to be mindful about when you don't want engagement, or when you need engagement to kind of be focused on the broader good rather than some more like selfish perspectives, maybe is an oversimplification. So I think that that's going to be one of the biggest challenges moving forward, is making sure that we stay true. I mean, we're seeing developers like astroturfing, right? And like hiring people to come to meetings, or paying neighbors off to, not in my community, but paying neighbors off to like not participate anymore. Like that's a sign that public participation is really important and really effective, but it's also teeing up these major ethical issues that as practitioners, we're going to have to contend with in the future.
Lauren, I just like you're bringing up some really good points. So, how do you sort of like, what are some of the solutions to some of those things? Like, because what I've always seen is like the earlier we engage, the better. So that sort of like, you're sort of taking care of maybe some issues that may bubble up and sort of become something that could stop a project or something. But, I would love to hear your thoughts on like, what are some of the solutions to those challenges that you're seeing?
That's a great question. And I'd be curious if other people in like the chat too have thoughts too, because it's a tough one that we contend with a lot. I think part of it is trying to think through how you turn engagement into policy. Because ideally, for example, people in my community are really concerned about affordable housing. I don't want to have a system where they have to keep showing up to every single meeting to talk about the importance of affordable housing. But we've recently implemented inclusionary zoning in Lynn so that we know every new development is going to have a proportion of affordable housing. That's not the end of the conversation, certainly, but it's an example where if you're taking the feedback and turning it into policies that people don't have to participate as closely, that to me is a key part of equitable economic development. I'm sorry, equitable community engagement. And that's important too. I try to think of community engagement as unpaid labor, that I'm like asking people to take time and energy out of their life to help me with my project and make my project more successful. And so finding, not only finding opportunities for them to do that, that's great, but then also finding opportunities so that they don't have to keep doing it, that we can make sure that we're doing it right from the get-go, and that there isn't that need to necessarily advocate really hard for things that frankly should be obvious or should be captured in a broader policy or planning document.
Thank you, Alicia, doing my job for me.
No, I'm so sorry. Oh my goodness. I
No,
was like,
good,
really,
good. Great question, great answer. I am also curious to kind of poke on that piece here. Humphrey has brought up an important aspect of that. Lauren, you say, sometimes it can be unpaid labor. Let's talk a little bit about how to make public participation maybe a little bit more equitable and inclusive. One of the ways that I see that being really important is by not making it unpaid, right? So I'd love to hear some more examples from each of you on how to make that public participation a little bit more equitable. And maybe I can toss it back to you, Alicia.
yeah, I totally agree on this topic. And so what we tried to do and what I really want to do moving forward is, especially if we're asking people for a significant amount of time. So for instance, we utilized focus groups, which I think to the conversation of engagement, maybe there's different types of engagement that work best for different situations. I love focus groups in a lot of ways because you can have, maybe a more robust conversation. You have a little bit longer, time with people. But what we did was we gave everyone, I believe it was either a $75 or $100 Visa gift card for an hour of their time, right? And it was a virtual focus group. If it was an in-person focus group, I really would have pushed for, like, if it was at night, having dinner or, food options, having childcare, because, to Lauren's point, we are asking people for their time to give us, their input about something that, we're working on. And of course, we hope that they will enjoy, what the end product is too, but really they're helping us in a lot of ways. And so I really want to compensate for that. We did a, very quick survey out in New Haven to talk about one of our electronic signs. And I think it was like a 2-minute survey. But if somebody did the survey, we gave them a bus pass. And a lot of people really appreciated that. And so it's really just this like this respect, right? You're giving me your time, so I would like to give you something in return if possible.
I love that. I hope someday that we'll be at a point where we're able to compensate people financially for their times. I think that's like the gold standard. Absolutely. I also really liked what you said about respect too, because to me, that's sort of, that's like the sandbox I'm trying to play in right now until I get to the paid part. But I feel like, to be good about community engagement, you need to respect people's time and make sure that your engagement is well designed, and really intentional and actually connected to things that you can change. And again, this goes back to the relationship of like, you waste someone's time, they're not going to come and participate the next time. So it's a pool that you have to sort of keep nurturing. And that is really important. I think the other components of that I try to keep in mind are sort of a no wrong door policy. And Alicia sort of spoke to this too, of like trying to have a lot of different opportunities. So for me, like sometimes that's even the same survey. Like we might be asking the same questions in one-on-one interviews, in focus groups, on an online survey. We might be asking community members to talk to their community and like report back to us. And then, if I get an angry email in the middle of the night, like I save that as if it came in exactly the way I wanted it to in the survey. So I try to make sure that no matter what door people come through, even if they're crashing through the wall of a different door I didn't expect, that it all gets processed as on equal footing. And I make sure that they know, like you send me an angry email, I appreciate it. This is how that feedback is going into this other process. I think that definitely helps. And then, again, like going back to this idea of like not being sort of overly reliant on community engagement, just as political cover, not as just like checking the box or being able to come to a meeting and say, I have 100 people who supported this. We need to be really mindful about what we're getting out of it, and that it's a sort of a co-conspirator relationship and not too focused on like extracting what we can get out of it. We want to make sure that when people are giving us their time, it's for a good reason and it's well designed and it's implementable as much as possible. And that might mean that you get feedback that you can't implement in this project, but that you'll keep down the line. I'm sure you probably heard things like that in the work that you were doing with the transit agency, that like, there's problems that are like way beyond your ability, or maybe beyond your agency, but making sure that you can track that as much as possible and set that up for a future project is really valuable.
Yeah, and I definitely will add one thing is I think that if you're doing like in-person outreach, the space that you create is important and how you make people feel. I'm even thinking back to like, meetings years ago where it was set up in here are the presenters on a stage, and then it's like maybe set up a room in a circle or set it up in a way where people feel like it's a two-way conversation. Don't set things up in a way that are going to look super intimidating or cause people to just want to walk by. And so I think you sort of have to think about how you are making people feel when they first see your event, or they first see your table, or they first see the meeting. Is how inviting are you being?
Yeah, and the venue itself can be a big thing too. I definitely get different people when I'm having a community meeting at the Buddhist temple versus City Hall, and different folks feel comfortable in different places. And I think sometimes the community likes it when I'm sort of on the back foot too, of like, okay, what are the norms here? Like, make sure that I'm like taking off my shoes where I'm supposed to. Like, I think it ends up being equalizing in that way too, and it helps people open up a little bit more.
This topic kind of brings me back to the point that y'all made a little earlier in this conversation about like that power piece, right? Where if the space is set up where you all have the power walking in, that automatically just perpetuates the same things that have been going on forever, where the feedback isn't necessarily going to go anywhere. Where Laura, in that example of the Buddhist temple, that power dynamic has shifted, and that imbalance kind of shifts back to the community. So I think that's really interesting. You all are also really mentioning quite a few innovative ways that this kind of public participation can happen, the creative things that each of you have done. I am curious if there are specific, technologies or other kind of innovations that y'all have used in that feedback loop piece that we also were talking about a little bit earlier, the looping folks back into the conversation after they've engaged?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think we're sort of at that stage right now with the work that we're doing. And so we've done a lot of outreach and engagement over the past year, and we've collected tons of feedback. And we've synthesized, we're working with CoSensus to get some sentiment analysis done. But what we're going to do to try to keep that, I think what I'm hoping is that the feedback loop and the conversation is a continuing thing. But it was important for me and my team to say, we have to go back out to the public to tell them what we learned. They saw us out, and then I don't want them to think we just disappeared. So we're going to come out with a video. It's going to be a pretty brief, YouTube video that's going to recap, what did we learn about the transit experience in Connecticut? And then at the end, we're just, we're not asking for comments anymore. We're going to ask for ideas. So we want to hear your ideas for improving public transportation, because really when we were doing the outreach, we got a lot of comments. We got what's good, what's bad, but now we want to start, sort of having people start thinking creatively and start thinking about, like, what would you suggest? What are your ideas for public transportation and how to improve it? So we're hoping that, being able to do a short video rather than, a town hall or sort of that presentation style setup, that it'll be a little bit more fun and a little bit more accessible, and we do have a phone number so people can call and leave, voice messages. So I'm hoping that people enjoy it.
Yeah, I think we're kind of in the same pot on this, Alicia, where, planners are going to plan. So like we end up with a lot of like dense documents. And in my team, again, Spanish is one of the predominant languages spoken in Lynn. We've been working a lot with our language engagement specialists on translation. And one of the things I've been realizing is that, like, if you have like a document that's really designed for me to be able to apply for grants, that like helps a government worker do their job and like understand the situation or meets a state requirement, that might not be the most accessible way for that information to be shared, regardless of whether you speak English or not. And so rather than spending oodles of money translating and redesigning a PDF into Spanish, we're sort of experimenting with pushing it more to video, like you were saying, because the video, first of all, you need to be really specific in like those 2 minutes that you have about like, what are the takeaways here? What are the points? I think it clarifies for people that like, we're not looking for feedback anymore. We're sharing information about like what had happened and like what we're going to do moving forward. And then you can translate it, depending on your approach and how much budget you have, you could have a whole video in Spanish. And so someone's not coming to one of those awful Zoom webinars where you have like the Spanish channel and like no one knows like what interpretation thing they have to hit. It's like really difficult, or it's an English language event that's being translated in Spanish. Like these are all perfectly good stopgaps. But if I can have a really quick video that's really accessible to everybody in their native language, that seems like a much better way to close that feedback loop and to set you up for implementation down the line, because people in the community are not going to want to read your government PDF about what you're doing.
They don't want to read my 30-page survey report.
So sad.
I mean, I love writing them, so I can't say anything about that. I know that I don't love reading them as a constituent of Rhode Island. Fun. So I actually, this brings us back to a point around, we're talking about some of those that move to video kind of as an example, and this more digital space, but we're also talking a lot about making those in-person engagements more accessible and more engaging. I'm curious if, in COVID times and that COVID shift to digital, if that has changed how you think about public participation and community engagement at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alicia had said earlier, like, I think in some ways that sort of elevated the importance, where suddenly it was a little harder to have the public hearings and things. I feel like it helped launch sort of the importance. And I think for the most part, it made a lot of our meetings, at least in Lynn, more accessible to people. And it really changed the vibe, I think. If you come into our city hall, it's this really intimidating council chamber. There's all these old white guy paintings on the wall. It's like, you know, you feel like you have to know when you're supposed to speak. There's all these archaic rules you don't know about. But when we have live streaming with Facebook, whether it's a hybrid meeting or whether it was just a Zoom meeting, it's a completely different experience. And there was one time when I was just too lazy to leave my desk to actually go to the public meeting, and I was watching on the Facebook stream, and I could see the comments coming in where people from the community were chatting about what they were making for dinner while they were on this this video. And I think for me, like as a mom, I was usually making dinner, like that's really a valuable experience. But of course, the flip side is that we have a huge amount of folks in Lynn who do not have access to those kinds of tools that would enable them to participate. And granted, I don't know what the Venn diagram of people who can't participate online and we're still coming to the public meetings would be, but it basically increase the expectation, I think, of like being able to provide hybrid meetings. Massachusetts, we're looking at legislation right now that would make it possible to do hybrid meetings moving forward. I know we have an universal design advocates in the room tonight. Like it's a huge element for some folks to be able to do that online and have that added accessibility. It's also a ton of extra work on the city side to be able to provide a hybrid meeting that does both. And we weren't really known for our terrific IT capacities beforehand. So it's a very real challenge to be able to provide that, but what a great opportunity.
Yeah, I will say for me, when we first started talking about this action plan, and this was probably like over a year ago, right? And people really weren't doing that much in-person engagement. And, you know, we were trying to understand transit riders all over the state. And I said, we have to go out to the stations. We have to go out to talk to transit riders where they are. So I really pushed for that. And so while there was a lot of, I think, virtual and things happening like that, I sort of said, I just want to go back out. And so, you know, I kind of talked about this a little bit before that. Yeah, it was a lot because we had to get to, you know, all sorts of areas of the state. We stayed there for about 3 hours. It was a time commitment, but that's where the transit customers are. They are literally out using the system. And so what better way to really talk to people is, you know, if they have 5 minutes, they can come talk to us, and it's not added. They don't have to go anywhere to provide the feedback. They don't have to attend anything. We're right there. And so that's really, I think there's a lot of tools we can use. I don't want to forget about that in-person element as well. And so I'm really, like I said, really proud of that. And we got really great feedback from people. So I think that was great. And the other thing I will say is, you know, going to already established meetings is really sort of key in my mind, right? Like if you can get added to an NRZ, you know, a neighborhood revitalization zone meeting, and you can attend their meeting and be a guest at their meeting, to me, that's a win-win. Because, you know, now it's not you asking somebody to come make a special, you know, trip or anything. You're going to where they are. So I love that too. That's what I would say is if you can get on people's agendas, do it.
Both really awesome answers. Thank you. I have one more question for you before we move into Q&A, and we have some questions incoming. But in order to wrap up this little phase of the conversation, I'm curious if each of you can talk through, we've mentioned quite a bit some of the obstacles we run into, Lauren, you know, just IT, right? Like that kind of thing, or budget or whatever else. Curious if you can talk through some of those more pressing obstacles and how you've overcome them in the past to kind of help the folks in the audience here overcome their own.
I mean, I think from my perspective, the planning department in our city is pretty new. And I think it's fair to say that historically, community engagement wasn't always part and parcel of the work that was happening with my colleagues, as talented and as committed as they were, or as they are. So I think one of the obstacles is that, like, you know, if I'm starting a project, I'm thinking about like a public, you know, I'm obviously passionate about this. I'm like, I'm going to, you know, a couple months do public participation, and this is how this is going to work. And at the same time, you know, sometimes other departments come to me and are like, oh, by the way, maybe we want feedback on this. And it's like a little late. And so I've been feeling like one of the obstacles is sort of building this as a practice for the city, not just in the work that my team's doing. Because again, it's not just up to my team to implement what people tell us, but also to build capacity throughout the organization. And for us, that's also like we spend a little bit of budget from our department to invest in tools that other departments use in order to do public participation. We try to advise on that and sort of be the like engagement gurus that can come and help do that. But it's really hard when it's like already kind of baked in and you're like, oh, we're going to quickly do this and we're going to translate it. It's going to be a little bit too late. And so that is one of the biggest obstacles I've been feeling most recently.
I will say for me, we have so much data now and so many comments, and sort of that's for me sort of becoming a little bit of a stressor, because to the point of building trust, I'm like, oh my goodness, you know, I want to make sure we get all of these comments to someone, and we look at all these, and you know, are we making sure we're gathering every piece of feedback? And I feel like a little bit that we have like a lot of data. And so I'm hoping this is something Consensus can help with, but that's sort of a challenge in making sure that like, I want to know every comment is so precious. And how do we make sure that we're, you know, doing everything we can with that one comment or that one piece of data they gave us. And so it stresses me out a little bit to think that like, I don't want anything to get lost in the shuffle, but at the same time, how do you reconcile thousands of comments and, you know, survey data and focus group? And I think we've done a pretty good job, but I do want to make sure that everything we got is amplified in some way. And I'm loving, you know, working with Consensus to hear more about how we can do that.
We did not ask Alicia to say that, just to be clear.
Not at all.
I appreciate it. Thank you both so much. We have some incredible questions coming in. We have an anonymous attendee who asks, what budget and resources are actually set aside for public participation and engagement in your respective departments? Which I think is a good, you know, what's the baseline here question.
You know, I can kick us off to say that we're a relatively new unit within the department. So we haven't really established, I think, like an ongoing, we have not yet. But I think to that question, it is important that when you are starting off with anything, especially when we started off this action plan, we made it very clear as a goal that the outreach and engagement and the customer feedback was number one. Like, so as we were planning out the scope and the whole project and the whole initiative, that was the center focus. And so I think you have to be a champion for that wherever you are, to say that we need this and we can't move this forward unless we talk to customers first. And so I hope that sort of answers the question. I'm not like, you know, we're a large agency, so to understand like all the budgets and things, but I think as a unit and as an advocate for public engagement, it's my job to make sure that we do have the right resources to do that.
That's great. I can say, so in my world, fiscal constraints are very real all the time. And so we're always coming up against the budget hurdle. So just answering transparently, I think we probably spend about a little under $10,000 a year on different engagement tools that we can use in different projects. So that includes like a web survey, it includes Consensus. We also have a website that lets us do share more about our projects. That's really helpful. We have a like email marketing system that we use to keep in touch with people after they've reached out with us on projects. So really like kind of handle it like a marketing shop. And so those tools can be used in a lot of different ways, and also helps us set up with like consultants that we bring in for projects where it's like, okay, I don't need your tool. Like we're going to use like what we already have, which can have some cost savings. And then in addition to that, we try to be creative about how we position our engagement to make us more appetizing for other people who want to fund projects. So an example is we had it was supposed to be a public meeting for our comprehensive plan. And I basically we had a new mayor in office, and I said, if you give me $20,000 in ARPA funds, it won't just be a public meeting for a comprehensive plan. It's going to be the Lynn Side Out Festival, and we're going to turn City Hall inside out, and all the departments can be there, and we're going to have food from local businesses, and we're going to have an art project with a local art therapy organization. We're going to have like bands and performances from different cultural groups. And that ended up being like a really easy thing to be like, yes, we should do this. And we even got additional funding from our county-wide community foundation to help us pay for some of the fun things with, like, we had Dominican dancers and Cambodian art groups participating as well. And then all of a sudden, everyone else wanted to contribute something. So like DPW had like money for a bounce house. Like, I don't know where that was in the budget. And people were calling in favors to sort of like make this a really cool event. And so, $20,000 isn't like nothing for us. It was a commitment, but I think because if you're coming at it from this creative approach and you're coming at it far enough in advance, sometimes these other funding mechanisms can fall out of the sky to make something happen moving forward. For me, I feel like it ends up, even in a fiscally constrained situation, it's the time that ends up being the bigger constraint than the money. Somehow we always seem to be able to work it into the scope or make it happen. But if you don't have enough time and you don't have the preparation on the front end, there's really nothing you can do to save it. There's no amount of money that'll get you out of that hole.
Yeah, and I will add one last thing, volunteers. So we use volunteers throughout the whole agency to attend our pop-up events. And I think that was great because, I mean, now you have a mix of people from our area and you have volunteers. And so if you're kind of up against maybe some funding, try to tap into, your team, or tap into the public and see if the people want to volunteer. So I think it's just a good way to get people involved. I know Katie, who's on this call, she attended some of the pop-up events, and they were a lot of fun.
That can also be a great way to increase the cultural competency too. I find if,
Right.
I have coworkers that look like some of the community members are from the community, like it's just a completely different conversation. So I often block walk and I'll just bring, someone who grew up in Lynn who's fluent Spanish speaker, and like he can bully those business owners into coming to meetings way more than I ever would. So having those volunteers has a lot of different benefits.
Thank you. Some great examples there. We have 3 minutes left, but I do want to get to this other incredible question that's come through that I think would kind of sum this all up into a pot, like a nice little packet here for the end. So, 60-second rapid fire. How do you or would you measure the success of a public engagement effort? Yeah.
I hate this question because I don't have a good answer for it. I think just like number of survey respondents is not great. It's a start. But then I also know if I ask people about their demographics that like a lot of people really have a strong reaction against that, which James can attest to looking at our data from our last consensus survey. And so it's really challenging because I don't think it's just a quantitative answer, but it's probably not qualitative either, in that like I'm probably not the best judge. I can say that, going back to what we were saying about building community power, that, after that festival where we had, hundreds of people come in, people filled in the boards, great. But one of the most exciting takeaways I had from that was one of our steering committee members from the plan said that they had taken the bus home after the event, and it was all these strangers on the bus with her who didn't know each other, but started talking about the community and what they wanted to see in Lynn, and like got to know each other like on the bus ride home. And like, I know that's like very warm and fluffy, but to me, like that's something that would never show up in the data, but was a huge sign for success. The fact that people keep coming in and being like, can we do that again? Like, can we, like, when's the next time we're going to do this? That like squishy stuff that's impossible to measure ends up feeling like the best sign that we've been successful.
Yeah, that's a tough question. So, by the numbers, it would appear that we did a good job, right? We had almost 10,000 what we're calling interactions, whether somebody left a comment, whether they just gave us on a scale of 1 to 10, how is your transit experience? So by the numbers, but I think the real test is when we put out this video and the action plan, did we get it right? Did we really understand what people are saying? And when we go back out to do outreach and we're wearing those same t-shirts, what are people going to say? Are they going to say, you got it right? Or are they going to say, I'm not wasting my time with you again because you didn't get the message? And so I don't know if we know yet. I hope we did. But I think it will be really when we put out the action plan in the video, did we really understand what people, want from their public transportation system?
Yeah, I think that sums it up, right? Like if there is a way to measure the needle moving of that trust piece, right? It's not about the number of people engaged. It's about did we listen and did we respect that time? And did we build that trust? So awesome. Thank you both so much for an incredible conversation. Thank you everybody in the chat here. James has just dropped a form asking you about your experience of this particular session. We're obviously all open for feedback. So please do take that. It'll take you 2 minutes. Thank you so much, Alicia and Lauren. It was a pleasure to have you. I learned plenty.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's been great.
Have a good night.
Good night.